discussing today's topics from an African American perspective. This is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Hamlee. So I'm sure you've heard the saying, do the crime, serve the time. But what happens once you've served your time? Are you, quote, punished forever once you're labeled a felon, especially when it comes to the right to vote? On today's Another View, we're going to talk about the efforts of the McAuliffe administration to restore the rights of former felons and the nationwide ramifications of such movements on other states. Joining me by phone is Secretary of the Commonwealth, Levar Stoney. Mr. Secretary, how are you?
Barbara, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. We appreciate that. Great.
Thank you.
Associate Professor of Law at Campbell Law School, Amos Jones. Hi, Amos. Welcome back.
Good afternoon. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. And here in the studio is Corey Brooks, Director of Business Development and Community Affairs with Youth Solutions. Hi, Corey. How are you?
How are you?
Great. Thanks so much for joining us today. So, Secretary Stoney, I want to start with you because I know this is a big initiative with the McAuliffe administration. And why is it important for this administration to make changes in the restoration of rights of former felons?
Well, first, Barbara, it's important to us because it's the right thing to do. Nearly 400,000 people in the Commonwealth of Virginia today, voting age population, are disenfranchised. And that's 7% of the voting age population, 20% of the African American population, 25% of voting age African American men disenfranchised. And so we believe that you should not be punished for the remainder of your life if you are ever convicted of a felony. You've done the time and you've paid and done the time and paid the price. To date, we've restored the rights to more than 16,500 individuals because, frankly, we believe in redemption, we believe in mercy, and we believe in forgiveness. Second chances is very, very important to this governor. And when he ran for office in 2009 and he ran in office in 2013, he talked about the automatic restoration of one's civil and voting rights. And unfortunately, the General Assembly hasn't done their part, so the governor has used his executive authority to do so.
So tell us some of the things that have changed. I know the previous administration started this process in terms of making it a little bit easier. There's always been an opportunity to apply to restore the rights. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
That power rests with the governor. It's part of the governor's clemency powers, which I'm responsible for over here in the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office. Some things that we did. We removed some of the hoops. Number one, a person who was convicted of a more serious offense or a violent offense had to complete a 13-page application in order to get their rights restored. Providing the governor with a letter of remorse, a letter of recommendation, also getting the notary public to certify their paperwork. We've removed that, and now it's only one-page application for more serious offenders. Previous administrations also classified drug offenses, whether it's possession of marijuana, as more serious offenses, so they had to wait 5 years. Now they only have to wait 1 year. They have no wait time to get their right to vote back. Mm-hmm. Also, court costs and court fees. You were deemed ineligible to apply for your rights to be restored if you owed court costs and court fees. No longer in this administration, we no longer recognize that as a reason for a person not to get their right to vote back. We thought that was akin to the poll tax. Today, like I said earlier, we've restored the rights of more than 16,500 people. That's more than the last 4 administrations combined, the most in Virginia history.
So, Mr. Secretary, then this is not, though, for every felon. In other words, there are still some crimes where you still cannot have your rights restored. Is that correct?
No, that's not. That's incorrect.
Okay.
Any person who has done the time and finished their supervision can apply and get their rights restored on our website, or give us a call or mail us the application. Anyone is eligible. You just have to. We unfortunately here create 2 categories for more serious offenders and for nonviolent offenders.
Okay. And, Amos, is that the case across the nation, that everyone who, once they've done their time, they've finished their parole, et cetera, they can apply for their rights to be restored?
Virginia.
In general, yes, a person's civil liberties may be restored. It varies by state in terms of process. some states automatically restore rights after a probation is done, and depending on the severity of the crime. Now, if you're involved in federal crimes, firearms, for instance, your right to bear arms can be abridged, even if the state, for certain state-included offenses, then that can be held up. So, but generally across the country, yes, state by state, one can get their rights back, and in some states they're automatically restored.
Mm-hmm. Corey, let me ask you then, as you work with ex-offenders and so forth, is the ability to be able to vote important to them, or is this way down the line in terms of other things that they need to get straight as they come back into society?
Well, it depends on the individual and their situation in terms of how and where they're returning to. So it has varied, but I will say for the majority of returning citizens that I interface with, things like adequate housing, being able to complete their education, maintaining a job, or as previously stated, if there are fines and other impediments in terms of being able to get their license back, that may take priority. Mm-hmm. However, in terms of our casework duties, returning their rights and civil rights is something that we impress upon them. And many of our older offenders, when they return, I think sometimes with age, you really look at the things that you've taken granted and what made you whole as a person. And the right to vote is something that is often highlighted. In addition to that, when President Obama ran, there were a lot of African-American males full of passion and really involved in the legislative process or wanted to be involved. And the one thing that they couldn't do was participate in that process. Mm-hmm. So it resonated. And from that, we would see a lot of individuals that really felt what it was to be able to be whole and to be able to vote and be able to participate in jury duty or possibly run for office, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. So, Levar, tell us what you talk to ex-offenders. What do they say to you as they're either going through the process or they've gone through it and had their rights restored?
You know, when I first started this office, I heard a lot of frustration, particularly people who owed court costs, you know, whether it was $500 or $250 or $1,000. A lot of frustration because, you know what, it's that unfortunate cycle they get in, and they're not allowed to have a driver's license because they owe court costs and court fees. And so, like, well, how are they ever going to pay those court costs up? Because it also accrues. It also accrues on their record as well. And so, you know, I heard a lot of frustration early on. But now we've expedited the process. It's never going to be automatic in Virginia unless we change the Constitution. But what we've done, we've expedited the process and streamlined the process. You know, Virginia is one of 4 states that when you are convicted of a felony, you lose the right to vote in perpetuity. And we just think that's just too punitive.
So what would the impact be if that 25%, as an example, of African-American males who cannot vote today, they're disenfranchised, if they had that right, what would the impact be on the political system?
Gosh, you know, you look at Virginia right now, and it's considered a purple state. The pathway to the White House goes through the Commonwealth of Virginia. Imagine whether or not we could actually, let's say we have 400,000 people who are disenfranchised. Let's say half of those individuals had the right to vote in this upcoming election. Can you imagine where the Commonwealth of Virginia would be, not only in national elections, but also in state elections as well?
Mm-hmm. And Amos, on the national level, at least according to one article that I've read, there are more than 2 million, or nearly 40% of African Americans disenfranchised nationwide. So as we look at today's political climate, what difference would that make if they were able to vote?
I think it's that 40% of those disenfranchised are African Americans. Mm-hmm. And so the impact would be great, particularly in these states like Virginia and North Carolina, where where the elections tend to be close. Some conservatives have claimed that the only reason that these felon reenfranchisement initiatives are taking place is to add more Democratic votes. That's neither here nor there. The important thing is that there are plenty of states where one's rights are automatically restored. And so we had begun becoming harsher and locking up people, throwing away the key and all of that, and it's just not working. We have found that particularly to the extent that these are largely African-American men, the shattered black family becomes even more shattered when you come out and cannot live in public housing, when you come out and cannot get a job. In fact, in the District of Columbia, the private sector has been compelled to help with a kind of restoration of other rights, including economic rights. In the District of Columbia, the D.C. Council has decided that it will be illegal to ask about felony convictions and other kinds of convictions if they don't relate to the job being applied for. And the reason is that it just beat the brothers down further, for lack of a better expression. It's serious, and I think I'm glad that people are getting serious about correcting this large-scale generational disenfranchisement that has occurred.
Secretary Stoney, you all also have a ban the box on the state applied jobs. Am I correct in that?
That's correct. Last year, I worked with the governor to actually put together an executive order that banned the box on all applications, state employment applications in the Commonwealth of Virginia. No longer will we ask whether or not you've been convicted of a crime on our state applications. We are still provided an opportunity to do a background check, but the employee or the candidate for employment can now talk about the offense they may have in the setting, and this gets their foot in the door.
So I want to ask a question of each of you, and I'd like to get your response to that. And that is, what would you say to those who say, you know what, you're a felon, you did a crime, I don't care, you still don't deserve the right to vote? Let me start with you, Secretary Stoney.
You know what, I always say this, these individuals were giving a sentence by a Democratic jury or by a judge. And I believe once they've done the time and the government believes the same way, that's it. It's not our people who say, oh, you're going to give rights back to people who may have sold drugs or may have committed a violent offense. And you know what? They've served their time. They've already done their part of the deal. Our part is to actually give them the dignity of being full and complete citizens again.
Corey?
I believe they should have the opportunity. It's a fresh start. They've paid their debt to society, for lack of better words. In addition to that, once they've paid their debt to society, there's so many other barriers that they're going to confront. And one was just recently alluded to in our conversation was the fact, once again, about housing. And those individuals that in their home plan or their loved ones that live in public housing, if they have drug offenses, things of that nature, they can't even return home. Employment. There's a lot of barriers to employment with certain crimes and offenses. And the jobs that they can acquire, they can't even earn what I consider to be a livable wage. So transportation and tickets and things of that nature, they do not have enough money to pay for that, take care of their family, whatever the case may be. It's a slippery slope. They get a job, they need to get there, they can't pay their fines, they can't get a license, they can't get there, they're pulled over, they have a ticket, driving on a suspended license, and the process starts over again.
And that becomes problematic. Amos, what about you? What do you say to those who say, nope, shouldn't happen?
Well, my answer to that is they really have the burden of proof to demonstrate sound logic and public policy. And when these bills were coming in and being passed in some of these states in the last couple of decades, you would hear ridiculous so-called arguments that went something like this. Oh, it's perfectly clear. If you did the crime, you should lose the right to vote. And that doesn't make sense. Voting, people who committed crimes are citizens as well. And because our prison population, while among the highest proportions in the world, is still relatively low, it is not as if we will wind up with a criminal state where most people voting happen to be criminal. That's not true. I am hard on crime, but I am heavy on restoration. So I can understand the need for people to be punished for what they do, but once they're punished for what they do, they should stop being punished for what they do. That's the purpose of sentencing, and there's discretion. Let me also say, it does not always have to fall on the legislature, though I support very much the work of Secretary Stoney and Governor McAuliffe. Governor Mount Huckabee of Arkansas gave so many requests for clemency and pardons, many of them African American. He's a Baptist minister, probably believes in forgiveness and all of that. They said that when he was governor, he would pore over those applications, and he gave so many that some of his Republican competitors were using that against him several years ago. So, we should not have to go through one person all the time, but there are those options as well. So the burden of proof is really on all of these people going around with these non sequitur positions that because you shoplifted baby formula, you should lose the right to vote and to live in public housing later. It does not make sense.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call. What are your thoughts about the ability to have your rights restored once you've done the crime and paid your time? Heather joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Heather. You're on the air.
Thank you. This is definitely failed logic in public policy. To pay for your crimes, crimes are awful. You are punished. But when you come back into the social fabric, the one thing a citizen must have is the vote, because it is an investment for that individual to feel involved again in their personal choice, and hopefully their vote isn't going to vote for a criminal, although right now, who knows, but their vote is an investment. It benefits the entire community and the society, and it helps them get reestablished, reintegrated. That benefits us all to be restored in civilization. It is their right to have a vote and a say in their future and in what public policy they would support once they have chosen to not be a criminal anymore. Oh. Once you commit another crime, then you go back to jail. But it is a total non sequitur. It is a shame. It's a shame on Virginia. I would like to know the history. Who voted this? Who instituted it? Did it come out of Richmond?
Okay,
this is a shame.
Let's let Secretary Stoney answer you then. Thanks, Heather. We hear your passion. Secretary Stoney, you want to give us a little bit of background and also tell us about what's coming up next?
Yeah, from my reading, I saw that this was placed into the Virginia Constitution in the 1901 State Convention to rewrite the Constitution. And, the plan at the time also included the poll tax, the literacy test, but also felon disenfranchisement. Now, we're over 100 years removed from that, and gone are the poll tax, gone is the literacy test, but what still remains? Felon disenfranchisement. And, Virginia is one in 4 states that, you have to still petition the government to get your rights back. And I just think it's ridiculous.
So as you continue to work on this, what else are you going to seek to do in order to make this process easier?
What I hear a lot from people, number one, is should we explore how can the government provide more rights to people? And I said 400,000 people roughly lack the right to vote in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And 16,500, that's a drop in the bucket. There are a number of people out there who still walk around this Commonwealth today without the right to vote. We're doing everything in our power to explore every avenue. Many have knocked down my door about whether or not the governor can actually issue an executive order and restore the rights to people across the Commonwealth. That's something that we're taking a long look at. I know that Bob McDonnell did as well, the previous governor. So we're doing our due diligence.
Okay. And before we let you go, Secretary Stoney, because we know you have other things you've got to take care of, but you are making history in the Commonwealth of Virginia. You are the youngest person to hold this position. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
And are you the first African American?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. I sure am.
Okay. Can you tell us just a little bit about your history? I so enjoyed talking with you when we were celebrating the Huntington YMCA on Saturday when you and I first met. But tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I grew up in Hampton Roads. I grew up on the peninsula. I'm the first in my family to graduate from high school and go to college and graduate from college. I'm the product of kids having kids. My mother was a teenager. My father was a teenager as well. I grew up on free and reduced lunch. And so when I sit at this desk every day and I read these pardon petitions, I look at the folks who are restoring rights to, I really, really do pinch myself. I was given an opportunity a long time ago, and I feel convicted to give that opportunity back to others. And this has been the most rewarding job I've ever had in my life. And I'm going to do the best I can with the time I have here in this office.
Fantastic. That is Secretary of the Commonwealth, Levar Stoney. Secretary Stoney, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you,
May
Barbara.
I
Take
wish
care.
Secretary Stoney a happy early 35th birthday, Secretary. a millennial official. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you
We
for all your work.
appreciate that. Absolutely.
Thank you.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. We're talking about the restoration of rights for those who are re-entering our society. Fred joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Fred. You're on the air.
How you doing? I think this is a timely topic. I am a proponent for felons getting their right to vote. But my question is, are there any statistics regarding the voting patterns of those who have had the right to vote restored? And I think you asked that question earlier, Barbara, but are there statistics regarding, are there any partisan disparities, racial disparities in terms of those who vote when they get the right, when they obtain their right to vote? In previous elections like 2012 and also in primaries. Do we have any indication that this is going to influence one party one way or the other, and that's the reason why certain legislators vote the way they do?
Okay, let's let our panelists answer that. Amos, I'm going to start with you.
At the moment, I'm not aware of any studies on the voting behavior of how felons vote. There was a poll in 2009 of an advocacy organization that found that there may have been very low voting on the part of felons who are reenfranchised. And, of course, the reason is bigger structural problems of democracy. More radical persons concerned about the plight of these individuals focus on the system that might have railroaded them unfairly in the first place into felony convictions or no contest pleadings. And then after the fact, the view that voting technically cannot give you a stake in a system that might be rigged in the first place. So your priorities may be, it's of course always better to have a right than not to have a right. But I would say that if the rates of voting are lower, it's because these fellows are preoccupied with more pressing individual things. Mm-hmm. Now, demographically, we might infer to the extent that a large proportion in Virginia are African Americans. We know that in 2012, 93% of blacks who voted in campaigns in the presidential election across the country did vote for President Obama, and it was 95% in 2008. So one might infer that this might be a more democratic demographic because of the racial correlation.
And Corey, on the ground, you talked about the fact that when President Obama was running for office, that you heard from ex-felons.
This is more anecdotal. I don't have statistics. However, just by observation, those individuals that we serviced in our programs, I remember voting days, them returning back with their stickers, I voted, or requesting transportation to their voting precincts. And being that I would say 90% of the individuals that we interface with through reentry are African-American males, there was a strong sense of pride in terms of the last presidential election.
Okay.
So,
if you're just joining us, we're talking about reentry, restoration of voting rights for former felons with Amos Jones, Associate Professor of Law at Campbell Law School in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Corey Brooks, Director of Business Development and Community Affairs with Youth Solutions, and the Secretary of the Commonwealth, Levar Stoney, who just had to leave us recently. Let's go to CJ in Norfolk. Hi, CJ. You're on the air.
Hey, good afternoon.
Hi.
Hey, I wanted to recommend a book that I read recently. It's called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Evans.
Very familiar with it, yes.
Yeah, it's, it speaks to, it really was written for people that don't understand the plights of people that are disenfranchised by having a felony. And I really recommend, I'm going to end it with that, but I really would recommend this book for anyone out there that says, well, they should just not be able to vote because they really don't understand the difficulty once you enter society with that on your back. Thank you.
Thank you, CJ. We appreciate that. Do you want to respond to that, Corey?
Yes, it's actually a good read. Is in my repertoire. Many of the things and issues that I deal with even outside of work is the issue of disproportionate minority contact or confinement. So there's so many different levels in which the book touches upon, in addition to what you interface with in the workplace with our returning citizens. And it's not just the voting rights. It's housing. It's being aware of what treatment that they can receive. Some of our returning citizens have mental health issues. They need insurance reinstated. They need fatherhood training. There's so many different things and impediments. So just going back to the voting rights piece, that's another disproportionate piece in terms of impacting our community. We have black men that cannot vote. Mm-hmm. And as it was previously stated, they've been voting on a Democratic ticket. So I don't want to create the illusion of conspiracy, but sometimes I wonder. You know, I see it play itself out so many times, and I see it not just impact adults, but I also work with young African-American males. Mm-hmm. And they're very despondent in terms of society and what's going on, police brutality, the shootings, Ferguson, so on and so forth. And
by not having an opportunity to participate in the civic process, that makes it even worse. Amos, talk to us a little bit about that whole idea of the self-esteem, I guess, and that may not be the right term that I'm searching for, but I think it is. The whole idea of wholeness, even though you have committed a crime, but you've also done what society said you have to do in order to correct that.
Yes. What these men, usually men, but increasingly women, are facing is really a complex of bias. Society is ordered around order, and when people have made mistakes and been locked away, they come back out into the life of the normal society and frequently have to make adjustments, and they're facing bias anyway in many cases. We all know that African-American people, you can be a journalist or a lawyer or a professor or a community advocate and face bias in the first place, and that has an effect. But when that's layered with the stigma of having been incarcerated with all the implications of that, then there are problems. I was getting a haircut the other day and was chatting with a man who is sending his son to military school to help him stay on the straight and narrow. And the barber, an older African-American man, mentioned that so many African-American men have been in prison, and he showed me something called the prison walk. And I had never thought about that, but he said that so many African-American men released and now reflexively have their hands behind their back and their head sort of knelt over the way you have to walk along in prison when you're going from place to place to eat or in order the way you're rounded up. And after so many years, you almost automatically turn into a person who is something other than the autonomous, proud, tall-standing African-American man or woman that you might have otherwise been. And these reflect a double whammy, if you will. And so people contend with that. I also wanted to speak for just a moment about bias. Mm-hmm. There was a study out by the Ohio Justice and Policy Center out of Cincinnati in September of 2008, and it was titled The Disenfranchisement of the Reenfranchised. 4 years later, that was 2008, and this was a nonprofit, nonpartisan law firm study, this Ohio Justice and Policy Center, that went back to data from 2004, in which there had been a report titled How Confusion Over Felon Voter Eligibility in Ohio Keeps Qualified Ex-Offender Voters from the Polls. Long story short, in 2004 it was found that so many Ohio polling officials were confused, they were turning away people who had automatically had their rights restored or could on the spot apply for restoration and be able to vote. Because the assumption was if you're a bad-off thug who's done time, of course you can't vote. When in fact, many of those people were eligible, had automatically been made eligible, or could have very easily applied and been made eligible to vote, but were given bad information across the 88 counties of Ohio, not uniformly, but enough. And that reflects this bias that we have in our culture that if you did something bad, it's the scarlet letter forever.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Faith joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Faith. You're on the air.
Good afternoon, and it's a wonderful conversation that you're having.
Thank you.
I have a special person in my life that I have been trying to figure out, well, we've been trying to figure out how to get their rights restored. The crime happened during the drug era, and he has paid his time, and he's no longer on papers anymore, but we keep hitting a dead end. And I was wondering if the District of Columbia is one of those states that automatically restores your rights, or do you have to go through the due process of having your rights restored, like in Virginia?
Okay, let's see if we can find out from our guest. Amos, do you happen to know specifically for D.C.?
Yeah, there are some low-level offenses in which reenfranchisement occurs. And, of course, the federal is completely different. D.C. is very different because some things can be federalized so quickly. In fact, our state prisoners actually wind up in federal correctional institutes around the country. I used to, as a matter of pro bono with the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, I would go around to D.C. prisoners and help them get parole, and I have to go all the way to Norwalk, Connecticut one year, and I went to Petersburg twice to that prison. And so some of our people wind up in the federal system, even though they otherwise have a state-level crime, and they're able to come back and get right back on board. So it just depends, again, on the offense.
So where would you have Faith go to start that process to even find out?
Generally, you go to the Secretary of State's website, and when it comes to voting, and that's how you begin the process of getting that civil liberty restored. A person wishing to restore civil liberties have to start in the state in which the felony conviction occurred. And if it's a federal crime, they just go in the county in which they live. And they begin by going through the kind of paperwork that Secretary Stoney was talking about in a place like Virginia. And so the beautiful thing these days is that you can go on the Internet, on the World Wide Web, and find a state, and most of the states have FAQs that explain to you the process and where to go.
Good luck, Faith. We hope that everything works out well for you. Thank you so much for that call. Ellis joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Ellis. You're on the air.
Thank you, Barbara, for taking my call.
Sure.
I am a precinct captain for the Democrats here in Norfolk, and I want to be sure that the appropriate people get credit. I'm delighted that the McAuliffe administration is really aggressively going after this. Restoration of rights is extremely important. And I have more than anecdotal information. One of the things that is important is that Sandra Brandt from our committee and working here locally in Hampton Roads has been one of the major persons who has pushed forward hard for the restoration of rights. And when I, as a precinct captain in the run-ups to elections and on voting day, am at the polls or in the precincts, I talk to people, and quite often when people say, well, I can't vote, I immediately ask them if they have lost their rights, and they will tell me. And I urge them, no vote, no voice. You're also going to have difficulties finding a job and being able to qualify for having a job. And so they immediately appreciate the fact that someone is interested in their plight, and they do. I give them the information about second chances. I urge them to call the registrar's office in the city of Norfolk to find out exactly what they're required to have. And now that the process has been shortened, that's making it a lot easier to approach people because they're beginning to hear about others whose rights have been restored.
Fantastic, Ellis. Thank you so much. Thank you for your work on the polls. Let me ask you a very quick question before we let you go, and we only have a little bit of time. But do you find that most people who are working on the ground understand the difference and whether or not someone has gotten their rights restored? In other words, does that information trickle down to you all so that when someone who has had their rights restored comes up to you with their ID, that there's no problem?
I have had many people, Barbara, come to me coming out of the polls and telling me about the fact that they so much appreciated the fact that someone from the local Democratic Party has been working with them and urged them to do the follow-through that's necessary. And so it is obvious that we are getting people, and I recognize some of the faces in my individual case. I'm a people person, and I do pay close attention to who I talk to, and I actually look for some of those folks when the polls are
reopening.
And we're having a flurry of voting.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ellis. We appreciate everything that you're doing for us here in the city of Norfolk and in the Hampton Roads. So thank you so much for your call. We only have a couple more minutes. I want to try to get a few more calls. And Mike joins us from Hampton. Hi, Mike. You're on the air.
Hi. Yes, I'd like to say that I've always thought that that states have been using the criminal justice or injustice system as a way around the Voting Rights Act. And I just think it's a national shame. And I also don't like the idea of placing the onus on a felon who has served their time to have to apply to restore their rights. I would like to see a constitutional amendment that automatically restores voting rights to any felon who's served their time, including felons who are out on parole and are not, presently incarcerated. I just think it's shameful. And, all of the mechanisms that have been used that were uncovered, for example, in the 2000 election in Florida, where automatic statistics were used to automatically bar people from the vote, from the polls in the 2000 presidential election. That at the time, Governor Bush had contracted with a Republican-affiliated demographics insurance company to actually
let's right, got you. We want to stick directly to ex-felons, though. I don't want to get into what happened back then, but I hear what you're saying. But go ahead,
may I
Amos.
give some numbers for that to give data to that? What he said that I like is perhaps to think about a constitutional amendment allowing, and he said restoring the vote after the term of incarceration. Now, I want to put this in context. There are only 11 states where one may lose the vote permanently as to a felony. Virginia's one of them. A lot of them are in the South. But then there are 19 states and where the vote is restored after you serve your time in prison, you do parole, and you're on probation. After all of that, in 19 states, felons' vote rights are restored. You may have to apply, but they're restored. And then there are 4 where it's even better. And I'm accounting for all 50 states. So we have 11 permanent. Virginia's the most extreme. Among those 11 most extreme, 19 where you can get the vote restored after those incarceration, parole, and probation. Then there are 4 states where your vote's restored after the term of incarceration and just parole. So you can do it while you're on probation. And then here's the good news. Here's the hope for today. D.C. and 14 states, after your incarceration for a felony, you can get your vote restored. You can even be on parole, and you can get your vote restored. And then I shall tell you there are 2 states where even when you're in the pen, you can vote by absentee ballot.
And what states are those?
And those 2 states are Maine and Vermont. They are very white. And they are Maine and Vermont. And in those 2 states, you can vote by absentee ballot when you're in prison convicted of a felony. So it's not unprecedented to have these rights even when you're in prison.
Got you. Let's see if we can get Rob from Williamsburg on. Hi, Rob. You're on the air.
Yeah, hi. I think your speaker just sort of, touched on some of what I was wanting to talk about or have discussed, is that it seems like, this is just another way that we sort of perpetuate the criminal mindset, because people make mistakes, and they come out. They're not allowed guns. If, the right to have guns, if they're a violent criminal, I understand that. But a basic human right such as voting, when they come out, they've been in prison with a mindset of survival. And then they come out, and then basically we say, you can't vote. You're different than us. We're not going to allow you to play in community. But then we act surprised when they continue to do what they've done.
And that's the exact point.
Not everybody, obviously, that goes into prison wants to vote.
Exactly.
But, the people that want to be able to participate and rejoin, resume, hopefully a useful place in society are not allowed to. And to me, that just seems another way to sort of perpetuate that.
Okay, I want to let Corey answer that, because that is something that we were talking about, this whole idea of not being able to become a full citizen. Go ahead,
right.
Corey.
Well, thank you for calling in.
Thanks, Rob.
There needs to be more forums where citizens interact and communicate about returning citizens and get past some of the biases and stereotypes, because there's a lack of information on the part of a lot of citizens in regard to people that have been convicted and have done their time.
Corey, Amos made a point that just almost took my breath away when he was talking about the gentleman still walking around with their hand, the prison walk. I mean, you see this on a daily basis?
I see it. It's almost like it's muscle memory, just like an athlete. However, once you've left an institution, you still have a certain mindset. You're in a survival mode. Many people in the mental health world would even say they suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because to survive in an institution for a long period of time, that's not a natural environment. That's why it's so important when individuals are about to return home that there's a real transition plan put in place, and that once they get home into the community, that they're receiving adequate services, and that there's a real plan with objectives and goals that's going to make them be able to stabilize.
So just that one small piece of, like last Tuesday when people were going out to vote, they see people going out to vote, even though it may not mentally click, that this is an issue, in terms of their self-esteem, that becomes even more of a problem, does it?
Yes. I mean, you've been gone for a while, some people longer than others. So there's a lot of phobias and things with technology. The world has changed since they've been gone. I know in some institutions they try to stimulate what real life is like outside the walls, but that's not reality. So they're in a position where they're going to have to make choices and decisions without a CEO or somebody standing over top of them on a daily basis.
So, Amos, where do we go from here? What do we need to do to continue this push towards making it possible for those who have committed crimes to still be full citizens?
Well, first of all, we need to support the work of wonderful solution-oriented programs like those run by the Corey Brookses of the world. Second of all, we need to look at what Secretary Stoney and people like Governor McAuliffe are doing and get that replicated in these other 10 states that have the harshest penalties taking people out of this. But, we need to keep going with the reentry, reorientation thing, but we probably also need to look at we do prevention. We do a lot of crime prevention and street law programs and things. We probably also need to have programs, and this is very counterintuitive and I think creative, but programs, once people get convicted before they go to prison, we probably need to have an intervention at that point. And I don't know of anybody doing this, because people tend to be in shock after they're convicted or they plead it out and they go to prison. Some of them are already in jail. But they need to be told how to make the most of their time there. Of the 3 parole grant hearings where I represented convicts, I think all 3 of them were murder convicts, 1 woman and 2 men, all of them African American. I was unable to do anything. I tried my best for the one man, but he had done nothing in the prison. He didn't go to any classes. He did nothing at all with all the programs that they offer to improve yourself. The other 2 individuals, to a person, had done all the programs, and one of them got parole even though he fell short numerically. I was able to make an argument and to use his good behavior, and he was released, and he had a wife waiting for him and some other things. And so we probably need to intervene on the front end as well, so that when they come out, we don't have the kind of recidivism, and we have people who feel that they can make a difference and become productive again and have their eye on that ball, even as they're on their way into the prison in what's probably their darkest hour.
And that is the Associate Professor of Law at Campbell Law School, Amos Jones. Amos, always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. Corey, you got the last word, and got about 30 seconds, a little less than 30 seconds. What would you tell people?
I would tell people who are going through the process to be encouraged, to be patient, and be inquisitive.
Okay.
And resilient.
All right. Thank you so much. That is Corey Brooks, Director of Business Development and Community Affairs with Youth Solutions. Stay with us, everybody. We'll be right back.
I'm with Marcellus, and you all are checking out Another View on WHRV 89.5. Don't go anywhere. Check us out.
Well, whether you remember her best for her Oscar-nominated role as Tina Turner, as Betty Shabazz in the Spike Lee film Malcolm X, or for one of her many roles on the hit television show American Horror Story, Angela Bassett has one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. The talented actress recently touched down in Norfolk to spend time with military families and promote her latest project, giving our Lisa Godley the opportunity to talk to her about the industry and her role in the movie to be released today, London Has Fallen.
Angela Bassett has spent her career portraying some pretty amazing women, but the Oscar-nominated actress doesn't have a favorite, comparing roles to children, loving them individually for their unique qualities.
The one that challenged me the most was, of course, What's Love Got to Do with It? You know, of course it's fun to film in Jamaica, you know, that sort of thing. And you feel a great sense of pride portraying, you know, one of our heroines, whether it's Rosa Parks or Coretta Scott King.
Unlike her role as Tina Turner, in Bassett's latest film, London Has Fallen, a sequel to Olympus Has Fallen, she doesn't get a lot of camera time. But that wasn't why Angela Bassett chose the role. She says she likes that her character, Lynn Jacobs, is the head of the Secret Service.
You think you can handle it?
Well, I'm competent, brilliant, stunningly beautiful, and really honored.
Thank you, Lynn.
When I choose roles, I think about film endures and lasts forever, and those images go on forever, and they have an ability to influence, and it was really satisfying that a year after Olympus Has Fallen, a woman was appointed as the first female head of the Secret Service. So in that instance, I like to say that life imitated art, because art can change, it can move, it can explore, illuminate, but there's an image that we had not seen before, and it's a powerful one, and it's an enduring one. And the more that we see ourselves in different frameworks and different perspectives, I think the better.
Angela Bassett was bitten by the acting bug in high school after watching James Earl Jones perform in Of Mice and Men. She went on to study at Yale University, earning a Bachelor of Arts in African American Studies and a Master in Fine Arts from the Yale School of Drama. One of her mentors at Yale was the drama school's dean, Lloyd Richards, who was so impressed with Bassett's talent that he cast her in 2 productions. And she stresses to those following in her footsteps the importance of mentors, among other things.
The thing is to train, you know, to continue your training, to always remain enthusiastic, absolutely professional. Locate a mentor, even if it's someone that you don't get to have a conversation with daily, but you admire them. For me, it was Cicely Tyson. Many, many years later, I was able to meet her, and that was a blessing. But years before I even met her, it was Cicely Tyson or Rosalind Cash or Gloria Foster.
She went on to share her personal goal once she chooses a character.
You look at the play, what is the objective of your character? You know, what does she need? What does she want? What is she trying to accomplish? And, you know, and then personally, is that a story that I want to tell? You know, is that a story that I personally can grow from? But you always look at your characters because it keeps you active in the moment, not just, spout saying lines. It can have make a real impact, on an audience, the truth that you're telling.
And Bassett says she's happy about the dialogue that the Oscar controversy has generated.
This is something that needs to be addressed. It always has to be on the page. So we need more writers, more characters. Those scripts have to be greenlit. So it's a real subjective industry, theater is. You may like me as an artist, but the woman standing next to you may not be particularly excited about me. So it's very subjective, but I'm excited about the dialogue and some of the changes that are taking place.
For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
And that's Ms. Angela Bassett. Really, really good interview. Before we end today's program, I'd like to bring to your attention 2 special events going on in our community. Hampton University's 38th Annual Conference on the Black Family will be held Wednesday through Friday, March 16 through 18 on the campus of Hampton University. This year's theme is Full Steam Ahead, Healthy Minds and Bodies Securing Our Future. The School of Science has planned this year's conference, and there will be workshops for all family members, including a STEAM Expo for elementary school students who will engage in various experiments and activities, and a town hall on the STEM void, why more people of color are not represented in science, technology, engineering, and math. You must register in advance. Go to events.hamptonu.edu or call 757-727-5239 to sign up and for more information. And tomorrow, Saturday, March 5th, is the Newport News branch of the NAACP hosting its annual President's Breakfast at 9 a.m. at the W. Henry Maxwell Family Life Center in Newport News. The theme is Honoring the Past and Looking Toward the Future, and will feature guest speaker and Norfolk native attorney Elaine Jones. Congressman Bobby Scott is the honorary chair. If you'd like to attend, call 757-237-7033. And that's our show for today. If you'd like to hear it again or share it with a friend, visit our website, anotherviewradio.org, and download the podcast. We're on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter at Barbara Ham Lee. Next week, lively political discussion with the Another View Roundtable. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Victor Bowen is our audio engineer, and Kamaria Mason answered our phones. Hey, don't forget to tune in on Sunday night at 9 for the final episode of Downton Abbey on WHRO TV. And while you're watching, support what you love and become a member. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Make it a fantastic weekend, everyone. And let's get together again next Friday at noon for Another View.